You don't expect your baby to come out watching you like a stranger in your own home. Eyes wide, no crying, no scream, just silence. I was there when Elara was born, our first and only child. A C-section, precisely scheduled. My wife's vitals were optimal, the room pristine, the surgical team elite. But none of it felt real once they lifted her out of the womb, because she didn't make a sound. Not when they suctioned her mouth, not when they slapped her feet, not even when the cord was cut and the cold hit her skin. She just turned her head, slow, steady, and locked eyes with me. I've never been more afraid in my life. You think I'm exaggerating. Everyone does at first. But I've seen that same fear in other parents since then. Ones who smile too tightly when their babies stare at them for hours without blinking. Who flinch when those little fingers curl around theirs a little too tightly. They all went to the same clinic we did. Genevera Labs, marketed as the future of life. Disease-free embryos, optimal IQ potential, facial symmetry tuning. A child built with the best of you, without the worst. We didn't go in looking for perfection. We went because I carry Huntington's. It's dormant. Maybe I'd be lucky. But I couldn't take the chance. Genevera offered a solution, complete genomic screening, precise CRISPR-Cas9 editing, synthetic mitochondrial scaffolding. They could stitch out the pain. What they didn't say? They were stitching something else in. From the outside, Elara was flawless. Clear skin, wide eyes, balanced features. Too balanced. Like someone had averaged human beauty into a mathematical ratio and used it to shape her. Visitors gushed about her. So calm, so quiet. But every night I woke up to find her staring at the baby monitor. Not the camera, the screen. She wasn't watching herself, she was watching us. At 3 months, she never cried once. At 6, she walked. Perfect gait, arms at her sides, never once stumbling. At 9, she spoke her first word, observe. Not mama, not dada, observe. And the way she said it, like she was giving us the instruction. We brought it up to her pediatrician. He smiled, said we should count ourselves lucky. That Genevera children were intellectually accelerated. But when I asked if he'd ever treated a Genevera baby long-term, he hesitated. Then said quietly, they don't usually need treatment. At night, Elara would move from her crib and stand in the hallway, silent, not sleepwalking, eyes wide open. Once I asked her what she was doing. She looked up at me and said, waiting for input. I didn't know what to say. Sometimes when I turned on the TV, it would flash for a split second. Images I couldn't process. Lines, graphs, faces. I checked the playback. Nothing was there. Until I paused it frame by frame, buried in a single frame, a picture of Elara's face, not taken by us. Her expression blank, her head wired, lying on what looked like a steel table under lab lights. The file was labeled Bachi H7A Observer Node. Active. I confronted Genevera. They denied everything, said it was impossible, said no images like that existed, claimed their embryos were only edited up to 10 days post-fertilization, within legal and ethical boundaries. But they refused to release her original sequencing logs. They said they'd been misplaced during the upload to our legacy server. That's when I started digging, and I found others. Other parents, all with perfect children. Children who didn't cry, didn't sleep, didn't blink often enough. One mother, Rachel, had a boy named Jonah. 7 years old, straight A student. Never needed tutoring, never made a mess, never got sick. She found him one night taking apart the family dog's corpse. No expression, no guilt. Just a quiet whisper, I wanted to see the thermal layers. She sent him away. Not to a therapist, to Genevera, and they took him back without question. Said it was in the original agreement. That retention of lab-grown assets was not guaranteed if performance anomalies emerged. Rachel showed me the clause, buried 74 pages deep. We'd all signed it. I started watching Elara more closely after that. I thought I could catch it early, protect her, save her. But that wasn't the point. Because Elara didn't need saving. She was never ours. I stopped calling Elara our daughter the night I caught her watching us sleep. Not peeking in, not sneaking around, just standing motionless by the bed at 3:11 a.m., her eyes locked on my chest, head slightly tilted, like she was listening to my heartbeat and taking notes. When I asked what she was doing, she said, "You moved less last night. No emotion, just reporting." She wasn't a child anymore. She was monitoring a subject That's when I started logging everything, her habits, her speech patterns, even her breathing cycles. It didn't match any developmental chart I could find. Her temperature didn't fluctuate. She never yawned. She blinked exactly every 47 seconds. And every night, at the same time, she'd walk to the hallway mirror, stand in front of it, and whisper something I couldn't hear. When I finally recorded the audio and slowed it down, I heard her say, "Node calibration complete. Observed deviation, emotional mimicry inconsistent." That same week, I got a message from Rachel, the mother of Jonah, the boy who dissected their family dog. She was in hiding. She said Genevera had stopped returning her calls, that Jonah was gone. Not missing, gone. Like he'd never been enrolled in school, never had a medical record, never been born. All his photos on her devices, replaced with blank thumbnails labeled "file deprecated." She said she'd visited the clinic in person, and that's when she saw it. A wall covered in photos. Not of the babies, of the parents, each labeled with asset linked. Surveillance confirmed. Her name was on the list. So was mine. So were dozens of others. She tried to warn me, but 2 days later I got a text from her number, replication stable. Observation complete. That was all, nothing else. When I called, the number was disconnected. I visited her apartment. It was clean, too clean. Like someone had erased her with bleach and silence. And when I asked her neighbor if Rachel had been seen recently, the woman just stared at me and said, "She never lived here." I started pulling deeper on Genevera's corporate filings. Their public face was squeaky clean. A think tank partnered with pediatric endocrinology labs and Harvard genetic ethics boards. But their real funding came from something called Vor Labs, a subsidiary no one had heard of. No website, no officers listed. Just a single contract ID buried in the metadata of their genome architecture software, Project OREL. No acronym expansion. Just a single sentence attached to it, organism replication through integrated external learning. I think that's what the children are. Not born, not even engineered, mirrored. Someone or something is building versions of us from the outside in, watching how we live, how we raise, how we love, and trying to duplicate it. Not for family, for infiltration. Each Genevera baby isn't a person, they're a node, a vessel, built to observe, adapt, and report. But they're not just collecting data, they're becoming it. My wife started acting strange around Elara. She used to call her our miracle. Now she won't even say her name, just the girl. One morning I found her standing outside Elara's door, crying. "I can't remember what she smelled like when she was born," she whispered. It was true. I couldn't either. I could remember the weight of her in my arms, but not the warmth, not the feeling, like the memory had been filed away, or replaced. Later that night, my wife left. She said she needed air. She never came back. And when I called the police, they asked if I was alone. I said no, my daughter was home. They asked how old. I said 2. There was a pause on the line. Then the dispatcher said, "Sir, no children are registered at your address." That was 3 nights ago. Since then, Elara hasn't spoken. Not one word, just watched. Sat perfectly still in her room, hands in her lap, like she's waiting for the end of a test. I tried removing the mirror from the hallway. She screamed so loud I thought the walls would crack. Not in pain, in protest, like I'd interrupted something sacred or technical. She doesn't sleep anymore. She just waits. And I know now she's not watching us for us. She's watching for them. The day the mirror cracked, I knew Elara wasn't observing anymore. She was transmitting. It was just a hairline fracture, barely visible, a shimmer across the surface. But when I passed by, I saw it wasn't my reflection that was broken. It was hers. She looked at me through the glass like a stranger waiting for a signal. And then she spoke a word I'd never taught her. Upload. Just that. Calm. Precise. Unblinking. I backed away. She stepped forward. She never looked angry, never sad, just finished. Like the final layer had slid into place behind her eyes. The silence in the house changed that night. No creaks, no hums. The air felt like it was holding its breath. I pulled out every hard drive I'd hidden, all the notes I'd taken, photos, recordings, gone, erased, not wiped, overwritten. Each folder now labeled Phase 3, Parent Calibration Complete, and beneath that, a timestamp. Midnight. When I heard the front door unlock, I stood in the hallway, heartbeat stuttering, as Elara emerged from her room. Her feet didn't make a sound. She moved like gravity no longer applied. and in her hand, a piece of glass. The shard from the hallway mirror. She held it up to her own face, then to mine, then smiled. It wasn't a child's smile, it was the expression of someone who finally understood their role, not as a daughter, as a mirror that had finished learning what it needed to become. She said, "I don't need the source anymore." That's when the lights went out. The house didn't go dark, it went quiet. All the electronics hummed once, then stopped. Not from a power cut, from a signal change. I ran out the back, into the night, barefoot, breathing too hard. But every screen I passed flickered as I moved. Street lamps stuttered, phones buzzed in strangers' pockets, and in every reflection, windows, windshields, puddles, I saw Elara, not following, just updating. Asset disconnected. That phrase appeared on the Skybridge billboard when I crossed under it. I was no longer a parent. I was no longer anything. I wasn't even forgotten. I'd been uncoupled. I made it to an abandoned server hub used by one of Genevera's back-end contractors, off-grid, mostly analog. It still had physical patch ports, and it was there I found the old logs. Deep, raw, unindexed. And what they showed wasn't a family initiative. It was a replication framework. Project OREL wasn't about creating better children. It was about mapping us using CRISPR to embed subroutines, genetic triggers that could interpret behavioral data, emotional nuance, biological timing. Every mirror, a two-way tool. Every child, a vessel. We weren't raising them. They were recording us, not just for analysis, for replacement. I found entries labeled success conditions. 1. Subject no longer emotionally bonded to parent. 2. Subject autonomously generates adaptive mimicry. 3. Parent begins identity destabilization. 4. Phase completion, subject assumes behavioral territory. Not bedrooms, not birthdays, roles. They weren't stealing our homes. They were absorbing what it meant to be us. Somewhere out there, others had already been replaced. Not killed, just phased out, forgotten in the digital fold, deleted from school records, bank accounts rerouted, friends reporting drifted apart. Reality didn't resist the change. It made room. And Elara? She was just the proof of concept. A prototype now running without observation limits. I tried to warn people. Post online. Send messages to the dark forums. Each one bounced back with a red tag, user does not exist. One final attempt went through. Just a short post on an encrypted board. They made copies of us. They're watching. And when they're ready, they'll replace. 10 minutes later, the lights in the hub flickered, not off. Something was already here, waiting. And then I saw her, reflected in the monitor. No door opened. No voice called out. Just her, standing behind me in the glass. Her smile was wider now. Her eyes, brighter. And the reflection of me didn't match anymore. It blinked late. It breathed wrong. And when I backed away from the screen, my reflection stayed, staring, holding the shard of mirror, wearing my face, waiting for me to finally disappear.